it's Eve, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to deconstruct a pair of trousers that you want to use as a base. So we've previously looked at how to draft a pants pattern using a method that I use, but today I want to show you how to deconstruct a pair of pants you already have and make a pattern from them. Let's dive in. So the first thing you're going to want is something to deconstruct with. I like to use a seam ripper. You can use a blade. The problem you're going to have is that if your finger slips, you're probably going to slice your fingertip off. I can't risk that. I have a bleeding situation. So I'm going to go with my trusty seam ripper, which is the tool that I always use. You could also use a pair of scissors. The problem you're going to find is the blades of scissors are quite meaty, and unless you've got a small pair of snips, you're going to struggle. I don't like to just cut. I like to actually keep the full pieces so that I can see the amount of seam allowance that was added, any kind of interfacing, any ease, that kind of thing. And you can really see that properly if you use a seam ripper. And of course, you're going to want a pair of trousers or pants, depending on what you call them. This is a pair that I got from Fat Face a number of years ago. So my thinking is I'm going to deconstruct them, create a new pattern, and I will show you that process too. And then I'll have a nice new trouser pattern or block to use for myself. After you've gathered your tools, the next step, step 2, is to actually look at your pants. Are there any things that can come off straight away, like patch pockets, or are you going to leave those until the end? You can see that my pockets on here, I have back pockets which are welts, and the patch of that is stuck to the inside, so we'll deal with that after. I have side pockets which are again welts, and it feels like they're connected to the side seam, that pocket itself, the pocket bag. Yes, so I don't have anything that can come off right away, so I'm going to think about the last stage of construction. When you make trousers or pants, you normally hem last of all, so that will probably be the first thing that I do, is unpick the hem of both legs and remove the elastic. Now, my plan is to unpick the entire garment, at least at this point I think it is. If it's a pair of trousers that you really like, you could unpick just half the garment, take the pattern and then sew it back together, and that is why you would really want to use a seam ripper, because if you cut it, you can't stitch it back together. The second thing to take off would be the waistband, because I can't actually get into the center back, center front or side seams until the waistband's off. So I'm going to do both of those and come back to you. So you can start by just cutting into the stitching with a stitch picker, or you can, once you've got a stitch or two open, you can actually go into the reverse. So like where that stitch has gone through, can you see that? You should be able to see that. If I slice that through, you can see that I'm now able to start pulling that fabric away. We can see the elastic on the inside. So I've already started unpicking. As you can see, we've got a nice amount coming through. If you're using your stitch ripper, I like to actually move forward, and then you can pull the stitches to separate them. But if you're using a scissor, you might also pull it. Got it. I find this a bit more fiddly because I worry about cutting the fabric. And for those who are happy to use a blade and they're not terrified of slicing themselves open, then you would literally just drag it along the stitching. My mom used to do that. She used to work at Waitrose, which is a UK supermarket, and she had these special blades for working on the deli counters and stuff, and she used to have them. She still has them. Well, I have, because she's not here anymore. But I still have bought the blades that she used in a container back at my dad's, and she used to just like run them along the stitches, but I don't trust myself. Quick glance, because I think this is quite interesting. You can see where I've just snipped those threads that there's some white showing, and that's just evidence of the fact that these trousers were probably made up in a base fabric and then dyed the color that they wanted, because the dye was unable to penetrate where that fabric was so thick and hidden bit by the stitching. It wasn't actually able to penetrate and dye the fibers. It's kind of cool, huh? So I have for the longest time looked at deconstructing clothing as a sign of investigation. As a sign of investigation? Is that the right English? As a field of investigation or a hobby of investigation. And it is, to be honest, the way that I got good before I actually went to fashion school. I would go around thrift stores, I would use my mom's old clothing, stuff from my grandma, my nana, and I would literally take it apart. You'd think I'd be faster because of that, but it's actually harder to unpick and talk at the same time and make sure you're not missing out. And so this was how I learned a lot of what I know. I used to take things apart and then put them back together. And the process of taking them apart makes you understand how they were constructed in the first place. So I think if you are someone who is very interested in design, like fashion design, clothing design, apparel design, whatever you call it, if that is something that you're really interested in, I would guide you to get hold of some clothing. I would recommend that it's clothing that isn't in the best condition, because I don't think it's right to take away clothing, or sorry, to undo clothing that is actually, you know, suitable for someone else to wear. The example I'm doing here is an exception. I wouldn't normally do this just for the sake of undoing it and studying it, unless you're planning on sewing it back together again, of course, because I am very strong on sustainability, and I don't think it's right to basically destroy clothing that could be used by somebody. But as I said, I'm not destroying this. So yeah, that is going to be one of the sure ways of you learning. So when I get this hem of the trouser leg finished unpicking it, when I have finished unpicking it, my English today is terrible, we'll be able to see the length of elastic that was used in the hem, the width of the elastic. And yes, we could have measured this through the hem itself. Like on here, I could have taken my tape measure and I could have stretched it out and I could have guesstimated, but it would have been a guess. It wouldn't have been as accurate as doing it this way. What we'll also see, as well as the length of the elastic and the width of the elastic, we'll also be able to see how much hem allowance was turned over to accommodate that elastic. And that's something people don't think about. They just think a hem is a hem. They're going to turn stuff over. But if you're creating a pattern, you need to think about these things before you even cut a toile. You need to think about how much hem allowance, how much seam allowance, how much facing. If you've got a jacket that you're working on, how much facing do you want to add? Do you want your neck facing to be shallow or deep? You know, there are all things that you need to consider. And by actually studying a garment that exists, you're going to better understand how it was constructed in order to recreate one for yourself. And we're getting to a tricky situation here. Tricky situation. This video might be really, really long. If you don't like videos that are long, I'm afraid that's too bad, because I'm kind of a little bit over of editing everything down. It takes so long and my time is precious. We only have so much time on earth. You can always skip ahead. You've got a fast forward button. I don't have more time in my life to, you know, if I'm going to spend an hour editing a video that's, the footage is nearly an hour. I mean, I do brief editing, like light editing now, but I'm not going to sit there and edit it down so it's a 10-minute synopsis, because my time is worth more than that. So here's that piece of elastic. I'm going to set it to one side and then we can measure it in the next section. In addition, for those interested, I will have this as a blog post on my website so that you can review it there if you'd rather see photos and not listen to me waffle. You can see how much the fabric had been gathered in. We can see it has quite a bit of a seam allowance rolled in and then sewn in and then turned under. So this is something that we're going to measure out later. I'm going to take a photo for the website, and then I'm going to do the other hem, but I'm not going to video that one because you've already seen this one, and we'll move on to the waistband. Okay, the legs are done. Now we're over to the waistband. So we have a label. Do I want to take that off? I think we might just be able to do that with the actual stitching. Now it does look like, so the waistband itself has elastic in it. It also has a drawstring. Probably we could take that off. I'm gonna not take it out because if I stitch these back together, which I'm hoping to do, I am going to want that to be in there, and I don't want to have to try and funnel it through. So for now, we're just going to take the waistband off. It can be tricky to get them started because commercially sewn stitches seem to be hammered through the fabric. Here we go, look, it's actually coming undone now. So I'm going to go from the right side because I feel like the edge of the seam allowance is quite a small amount and I really don't want to rip that to pieces because I want to be able to measure it. So I'm going to continue on and I will come back when this is off. I've managed to get, this has taken me like an hour. It's ridiculous, but I did get the waistband off. The problem that I had, I think I mentioned, but maybe I didn't, is that it had been stitched on like we would normally sew a waistband, and then this had been top stitched over. I had assumed it had just been a quick ready to wear cut and sew kind of thing. So that's off. I'm not going to deconstruct this right now. I feel like I'll have to know exactly how much elastic is in there. There's this section that doesn't have any elastic. You see it's been trimmed and stitched in place. So this was quite a nice flat open at the front, which is good because it means it doesn't like gather up too much around like your crotch area. And then the elastic feels like it goes all the way. So this is what the trousers look like without the waistband. I've got lots of scraggly bits everywhere. We can see that the seams on the inside are French seams, which is great because, you know, it's a higher quality manufacturing process or construction process. Downside is it's twice the amount of stitching to unpick. My decision at this point, how's the side seams? The side seams are also French seamed. Oh my days. So I guess, well, these are also top stitched the way that a side seam usually is. Can you see? So they've done French seams and top stitched them. Have they done it on every single seam? They have. Okay, my job is to unpick all of this. It's going to take forever. Your job is to decide whether you want to take the time to unpick the seam. If it's a pair of trousers, a pair of jeans, you're going to have a lot of top stitching. So do you want to be able to undo all the top stitching and then undo the seams as well for enclosed seams? You might have welt seams, you might have felled seams, you might have French seams, or do you just want to very carefully cut along that cut line? The choice is yours. I tend to actually unpick, and that is because I'm going to get the more accurate pattern. It's going to include all the seam allowances. I'll have the original stitch line so I can see which area was stitched to which, and that's just the way I'm going to go about it. So with that in mind, I'm going to look at the crotch because that's going to tell me which seam I need to do next. This seam is uppermost, you can see, so that means I need to unpick the inseam from the hem all the way up to the crotch and down to the other hem. So I'm going to do that off camera because I'm not sure anyone needs to see that. It's going to be a lengthy process. Wish me luck, friends, wish me luck. Okay, looks like the inseam has not been stitched, so that's good. It's only French seams, not top stitched. Phew. And off I go. It's the next day because the light went. So I have managed to undo the inseam, which was a French seam all the way. As you can tell, that's all been undone. The next job is to undo the center front and center back seams. That's going to give me a big sheet of fabric. If I do that, then it means I can potentially not have to worry about unpicking the second leg because I will have the legs separated, so I can just do the one. Because aside from maybe the center front has the fly, it's a faux fly, but aside from that, the legs are identical. So that's the plan: center back and then the center front. I have finished the center front, so I ended up coming in from the bottom of the center front, so the crotch section, and unpicking my way up, and that actually was a bit faster. It still took me a good 45 minutes though. So I'm going to move on to the center back and then separate the legs down the side seams as well. Okie dokie. We have got the left and right legs separated down the center front and the center back. As you can see, I'm going to set this to one side, and then I'm going to only undo the side seam on this piece. So the whole center back, center front has taken me about an hour, and you know, if you're slower, don't stress. It is, for me, I'm working with French seams that have been top stitched, so it's basically 3 different stitch lines that I'm unpicking, and I'm doing it very methodically in order to be able to put them back together again. If it's something that's trickier for you and you know, like maybe it's a garment that is kind of worn away and you're not going to wear it again, then you don't need to be as particular as me. But I am a little bit of a perfectionist and I like things to be done right, and that is what I'm doing. Okay, we're working our way up the outside leg. So as I've mentioned before, you can see it's already been top stitched. So it's a French seam, so it's taking a bit of work to get it undone, but I wanted to just remind you that you shouldn't be ripping it apart. If you pull it, you're going to actually stretch out the fabric and distort it, and then the pattern that you take isn't going to be accurate. I didn't iron these before unpicking because I saw no point. If I iron them beforehand, they're just going to get creased while I'm unpicking. Once the unpicking is done, we can look at them and determine whether we need to press them out. But I'm not, like you see, I'm not ripping this open to pull the stitches out because that will stretch the fabric. I'm using my ripper, my seam ripper, stitch unpicker. They get called so many different things, and I'm just really carefully just cutting those threads, and I'm using my fingers to provide tension so that, again, the fabric's not stretching. If you find that too fiddly, you can use your scissors. I've been doing it on and off, but I only have these big scissors, and I find that quite often I can't get in there properly. You see, and I worry that I'm going to cut the fabric. So I'll continue with this and then come back once they're fully done. It's taken me a few hours, but I have both legs separated, and then I've done the entire outer seam, so the side seam of the trousers have been completely, oh my goodness, deconstructed. So I'm now going to gather the tools I need in order to make the pattern. Okay, we are down to the pattern creation stage. What I have got is my cutting mat laid out. This is because it will give me a little bit more width on the table, but also I am likely to use my tracing wheel. And you can see the tracing wheel has sharp points. I don't want that damaging my table. So if you have one, then a tracing wheel and a cutting mat is handy. If you don't, it's not a problem, not a bother. You can use a pencil. And you could even use pins to pin the piece of fabric that you have deconstructed to the pattern paper. I'm using a rattly tracing paper. It's shiny on the one side and matte on the other. And what I'm going to do is I will be using either a 4H pencil. This is the one that I would normally use because it gives me a nice, clean, sharp line. But I also have this is a mechanical pencil. I'm sure you've seen a mechanical pencil before, but it allows me to create a darker line. So if I feel that this is too light and you're not seeing it, I will switch to this. These are a pain because they're great for sketching, but if you're actually doing patterns, then the lead does break quite easily and that can be problematic. First of all, you're going to want to make sure you've got a piece of paper that's big enough. This is just about long enough. You can't see the hem because it's beyond here, but I will modify this when it comes time to do that section. So what we're going to do is I like to just evaluate the garment piece first, the section. So I can see this is the front leg. Right side is facing up. I can tell this because I have a pocket opening right here. I want to think about the seam allowances. So I can see the seam allowance here because I've got the raw edge. So the stitch line is going to be that little line of white dots. On the hem, well, what I'm going to actually do is draw in the length of the hem, the finished hem length, but I'm not going to necessarily add in the fold or the hem allowance, okay? Because this is wrapping up the elastic and I don't want necessarily to restrain myself to that, or constrain myself rather, to that length or width of elastic. So I'm only going to draw as far as the hem. The next thing to consider is the other seam allowances. So on the center front seam, we can see that I have a top stitching line that's visible and it continues all the way around that crotch curve. Okay, you can see that top stitch line. You can also see that when I look behind it that it's got 2 folds of seam allowance, and that's because this was a French seam. So what I'm going to be doing is literally drawing around that actual folded seam, that folded edge of fabric, because everything else beyond that, all of this is just seam allowance. Okay, the same goes for the inseam. This was a French seam, but it wasn't top stitched. So if you look carefully, you can see those holes. Okay, the little white pinpricks of light, those are the original stitch holes, and those are going to be what I'm tracing off down the inseam. And then on the side seam, or the outer seam, whatever you prefer to call it, the same thing. This was again a French seam with top stitching. So there's actually 2 lines of stitching along here. The reason there are 2 on this side is because the top stitching would have been on the reverse, and that's normally to make sure that if I was to fold this to the front and then top stitch down, that's a lot of bulk in that seam where the pocket meets. So typically the seam is pushed to the back and then top stitched down the back section of the seam, side seam. It's a lot of words, it's a long day. So I will be following the line, not the outer dotted line. I don't think you can see that. I'll take a photo and put it on the screen, but the inner dotted line, which would have been the original. Would it have been? No, sorry, the outer line. The outer line is the stitch line, the inner line is the top stitch line. Okay, hope that was clear. Let me get sorted and I'll show you what to do. So I've got a few things on the actual garment section, so the front pant leg, and I've literally just smoothed the fabric naturally. So I'm not dragging it and trying to stretch it, and I'm just popping weights on it. And the reason for this is just going to help stop the fabric from shifting. You might find with the front, if your garment was elasticated or had any ease that had been gathered in to pleats or anything like that, that you might need to just stretch out the waist to prevent it trying to sucker itself back in again. Okay, and with that in mind, I can now start. Another option, I should have mentioned this but I didn't, is you can actually use pins to secure regular dressmaking pins, but you can use this to secure the fabric piece to the paper. I try not to do that because I think weighing things down is better. It means you're not going to mark the paper with pinholes. I'm going to take up my pencil. I'm going to save the tracing wheel for the elements like marking in the shape of the pocket and the front fly, just because I suspect most people watching this will only have a pencil, not a tracing wheel, and I don't want to necessarily teach you a method using a tool that you don't necessarily have. So pencil first. Now the first thing is to get that crotch curve in, okay? Because everything's going to shift and I want to know that that's done. So I have the fabric all laid out and I'm just going to draw. I'm actually going to get the mechanical pencil because I want a darker pencil. Now in theory, from where the front fly starts, it's a faux front fly, but from where that starts up to the top, that should be a straight line. If your knuckle doesn't get in the way, mine always gets in the way. because I'm in this area and I have the fabric piece secured, I'm going to use my tracing wheel to trace off the shape of the front fly facing. No, you're going to wobble because you're attached to the table, sorry. And then I also want to mark it in further up. And actually, in terms of seam allowance, I've got about a ½ centimeter all the way along. So I'm just going to mark in, following that line, because I'll note down that actually there is seam allowance included in that section. And then I want to, now I want to mark in, while I remember, because sometimes I forget these things, I want to mark in the perimeter of the pocket. I'm going to mark the external perimeter so I know that that's the finished edge. If you don't have a tracing wheel, the method that you can use is to roll back this section that you've already traced off, roll it back, draw, like fold it as far as here, draw around the fold, roll it back, and then do the same top down. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. So that's the outer edge of the pocket, sorry, the inside edge of the pocket. I also want to mark in the welt pocket placement. And then I'm going to pop those scissors back there to hold that in place. The next step is to come down this is the side seam or the outer seam, inseam, outer seam. So we're going to come down here. Again, just a quick reminder that the stitch line that I want to be tracing is just inside. So what I'm actually going to do is use my tracing wheel, and that's because it's going to make it a little bit easier for me to follow that line. You can see that the top of my trousers has pulled in from the line. The line ends here. You may not be able to see that on the screen. This is where it ends and it's bounced back in. So I'm just going to pull that back out and I'm going to trace off that stitch line that I mentioned before, if I can get it to stay in place. This is why pins can be a good idea. And I'm going to go as far as the pocket for now. Oh, am I? Actually, since I'm on a roll, I'm going to continue. Okay, well I can actually only go as far as there because of my lack of cutting mat. So I'm going to make a mark there. And then we now need to also take in the, again, I'll be using my tracing wheel, but I'll be marking in the inside, so the inseam stitch line. And again, I've just marked that where I only got as far as, because I need to shift stuff up. In order to show you this section quickly, because I said that I would, I'm just going to roll these down. So if you didn't have a tracing wheel and you wanted to come across here, you could literally come back, fold back as far as the line, and you can see that here, and then draw along that line to note that in as being the pocket bag edge. Okay. You can see we've got my lines in. They're a little bit wobbly, that's fine. We're going to straighten everything up. We should be able to see, yeah, I've got a nice dotted line from my tracing wheel. So now I'm going to pause. I'm going to move everything around so that we can do the lower leg. Now, I'm quite methodical and a bit of a perfectionist and precise, even though I don't like to iron. That's a kind of like family trait more than anything. I'm just going to put that back actually. So you don't have to necessarily be as precise as I'm being. I'm just, as I just said, I'm a little bit precise. So I'm going to restart from that line on the outer seam using my tracing wheel again. And I've got all these things on here just because I want to make sure that stuff doesn't shift. I'm just tracing along, I'm smoothing the fabric towards the outer edge so that I can trace it with my tracing wheel and get a nice clean line. Okay, so that's the outer seam leg done. Now we've got to deal with the inseam. I'm going to attempt to mark in the hem quickly with just a kind of somewhat straight pencil line. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my tracing wheel from that marked line here down the rest of the inseam. And that's it. Now I can remove the trouser leg. It might get a little bit noisy. Set it to one side. The only thing I didn't do, and which you really should, is put in your straight grain line, which you should be able to see from the grain of the fabric. I didn't think to do that. However, that doesn't mean I can't still do it. What I want to check is whether the grain of the pocket, looking at the pocket's on grain. It's a straight grain pocket. and I can see that it's in line at the top. When it curves down, so let me show you, you can see that the pocket does curve further down. That's not on grain, so the grain is pretty much in line with the pocket facing. I hope that makes sense. Now, if you used a tracing wheel, it can be tricky to see what you're looking for. Still don't know if you'll be able to see it, but here there are little dots. Let me see if I can do it like this, that helps you to see it. No, I'll put a photo on the screen so that you can see. With that in mind, I'm going to find the pocket dots, which I can see here. I'm going to line up my pattern master and draw in a line so that you can see it. Then I'm also going to do the straight edge curve at the base, although it's actually curving quite a bit. It's not as straight as I would expect. And I'm just going to mark in that slightly curving edge. You can also freehand this. If you prefer freehand, you can freehand. I love to freehand, but I also appreciate that people sometimes don't like freehand and they would rather see something demonstrated with actual, see, rulers. And then that needs tidying up. I don't like that. Okay, so that's the pocket. So I'm going to make a note. So then from that, I know that I need to cut a pattern that is this plus seam allowance because it gets turned in. And then we're going to pop in the welt pocket. And again, the lines are not overly clear. Maybe I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to go beyond, straighten things out and erase things when I need to at the end. I'm going for a 90-degree angle, and to get that 90-degree, I just make sure that my 90-degree line is on the line that I already drew. Now, what we could also do is take the piece of the garment that has the welt. I can measure it. We're going to measure the width. I'm going to start from 10 because this metal thing makes it a little bit inaccurate. So I'm going to start from the 10 and use that as my 0. So we have 1.5 wide. That's 1.5 centimeters. I'm wonky riding. And then we are also, I'm looking for the actual hole, where the hole begins, like the actual cutout. And it's 20, almost 24 centimeters. I'll write 24 down because that's probably a good amount for a hand. And then from there we can continue. Oh, it wouldn't have been 24, it would have been 14. And actually it's 13.75, which is approximately what it was anyway. So I'm just going to draw the line 1.5 centimeters in. And I'm going to write down welt pocket opening. If you don't know how to do a welt pocket, I have a tutorial on that on my YouTube channel, which I will link. Okay, now we're free to add in the hip shaping. So what you might want to do at this stage, and this is completely optional, because I've chosen a pair of trousers that actually fit me quite nicely. I like how they fit around the waist and at the bum, around the hip. I like the amount of ease in the crotch, the body rise. But you can also just measure and make sure I'm coming up to the dotted line here. So that's a 30 centimeter for the front. And I'm just going to put that against my body. I might just add an extra centimeter here. This isn't something you need to do at this point. I just like to do it for making sure that when I do put this into a pattern for a toile, for a fitting toile basically, that it is actually going to be able to fit my body. I'm drawing a straight line from the center front across, and I'm going to make a nice curve using my French ruler. If you don't have a French curve, you can freehand it. You can use whatever kind of curve ruler you have. Just make sure you're following your original line as closely as possible. Now we're going to draw in my outer seam or my side seam. I'm going to use this nice edge here. Maybe I don't want it to come all the way out because it looks like it's going to mess with my line a bit. This is a little bit too far. I am going to mark in the straight edge. And then if I wanted to, I could probably follow that pretty much perfect with this ruler. Yeah, I can actually. The original line, which is going to give me a very gentle hip curve. If I wanted to come out a little bit, I can always come out a little bit, but we'll leave it like this for now. And then I'm just going to follow the dotted lines from where I traced it. I actually have a new office, which is great because it means that I can do pattern making on my large table there. The downside is that the lighting is terrible, so actually recording the videos there is impossible because it's like office lighting. So they have like these lights that shine down from different angles and I can't turn them off. So we're limited on space. Maybe I'll go back to doing half size. Okay, I'm trying to find the dots. You can feel underneath as well with your finger if your eyes are struggling to see the holes left by the tracing well. Maybe that straightens out at that point. Okay, now we can roll up and move to the hem. Okay, now we have the paper the opposite end. We can just continue straight down to the hem. Maybe I want to make that so it's not so, can you see it feels a little bit abrupt here. Then we'll sort the hem. And then straight up the leg. Now, this section here is important, as is this, because you can see that this one is coming in at an angle. It's not square. Let me show you what I mean. I'm basically going to draw a line at a 90 degrees angle, okay? Because of this addition, it means if I just continue this down for the hem allowance and then the seam allowance, when it comes to being folded up, it's going to be too small to fit because we have this extra fabric. So the way that you would do it is you would actually fold this piece of paper, over, mirror this line with this line, and then you're going to trace off this amount depending on how much your hem allowance is. So if my hem allowance was 2.5 and that's the bit that's like rolling over my elastic, that's here, what I would then be doing is tracing this line. I'd be mirroring this piece of paper here. And what that's going to enable is that when I then cut this with the hem, it would say come out to about here. I also need to add seam allowance, and then I would mirror that from here to here, which is about 1 centimeter. So I'm not going to have a straight line, which will mess up the actually fitting. It's going to twist the hem and just make it a bit meh. I'm going to do it properly. And the same over here as well. This one comes in just slightly, I feel. Yeah, can you see there's a difference there as well? But the same thing applies, like 2.5 up from that. You know, it's only a few millimeters, so that might work. It might be okay to ease, but definitely over here, like if you add the two together, you've got 0.5 centimeter. Okay, if you did that to the back, that's suddenly 1 centimeter of fabric you've got to find a home for. Okay, so that is the front leg done. The last thing to do is to put in the rain line, which I've already said is parallel to my bag facing edge, the pocket edge of my pocket facing rather. So that's easy enough for me to draw in. You might also want to mark in any notches. So if there's a specific point on the pair of trousers that you're using, maybe you've got a seam on this back and a seam on the front and you want to align those. Those would be the things to mark in now. Then you could add on, well, what I would do is I would trace this off, add seam allowance, and then set that to one side ready for cutting out of calico and fitting. The next job is to do the back. And with the back, we're going to make sure that we line up the edge of the pocket with where it actually comes on the back trouser leg, okay? Because that's going to be a balance point, it's going to be a notch. Again, you're going to want to make sure that your crotch curve is in accurately, make sure you smooth everything out, but it's the same exact process. You'll notice on the back of my trousers that I have the same kind of pocket. It's a welt pocket, and the pocket bag, the facing for the pocket, is sewn as a patch. So it's very, very similar to what we've already covered. Super simple. Just make sure everything is placed out, weighed down, and trace it off. And then the last thing to note is the waistband. Now, I have chosen not to unpick my waistband, and the reason for this is because I actually want to put it back on. If we analyze my waistband, we can see that it has a channel. Well, first of all, there's a section that's flat. It doesn't have any elastic in it. It just has drawstring access, okay? The drawstrings are inserted through small buttonhole openings, so no eyelets, just thread buttonholes. And there's a channel that has been sewn that allows just enough space for the drawstring to go through, and it's been sewn all the way along the flat section and also all the way along the elasticated section. So the elastic is the full width. You can see that it's been tucked in and under, okay? Let me measure that now so we know what we've got here. Again, I'm going to start on 10 for my 0. So it's 5 cm, just under 5 cm wide elastic. It's actually the same elastic that I used in the trig shorts for David and in my summer shorts. Both summer shorts I made actually, which I love wearing. It's a very nice amount of stretchiness to this elastic. I like that there's a flat section at the front. I think I would also be tempted to put a flat section in the back just so it doesn't bunch up around my bum. This has a centre back seam, which is standard because there has to be a seam in this piece of fabric, otherwise how did it get joined together? The seam has been placed at the back. It's cut on one long piece, and yeah, it's going to be 5 cm for the front, 5 cm for the back, plus the seam allowances. It has been interfaced, as you can see. That's that, just a nice simple elastic waistband. Easy to create. If you don't know how to make a waistband, waistband pattern, I'm sure I've got an article on my website. If I have, I will link it in the description below. So as you can see, it is a time-consuming process deconstructing a garment in order to get the pattern from it, but it is a worthwhile process if the garment happens to be something that you love and that you're probably going to want to make more than once. I really love these trousers. I find them really comfortable. I've had them for quite a few years now, and I'm glad that I have taken the time to deconstruct them in order to create the pattern. With the pattern that I showed you, that I consider to be my master pattern, so I'm not going to do anything to that pattern. Once I have the full thing there in front of me with the waistband, which I'll probably draft from scratch, I'm not going to trace off that waistband because it's easy enough to take the measurements in order to get an accurate measurement. So I already showed you measuring the width, like the depth of the waistband, but if you need to get the length, all I do is just stretch it out and I run my tape measure along it. It's very simple, very easy to do. It's never failed me. Probably want to start at a point that you can return to. So for me, that would be the center back. We already looked at the fact it has a seam. Can you see that? So I would start with my tape measure there and hold it really firmly in place. And then you're going to pull the elastic and walk your tape measure along. So my thumb says it's 9.5. Okay. But I can see already it's shrunk down, and actually that has become 6 centimeters, the amount of stretch in that elastic, which sounds confusing, but it's not. So again, stretch it, walk it, let go. Stretch it, walk your tape measure, let go. And you know, you're going to get a little bit here or there, one way or the other, something might be slightly off. But as long as it's greater than the top of your trousers, you're going to be fine. Again, I can see that the total length, it really hurts like pulling the elastic so hard, is 124.5 centimeters. So that is, what's my hips? My hips is 124, but that would be going on my high hip, low waist. So yeah, that works out about right actually. There you go. I'm actually going to trace off everything within that master pattern. I'm going to create a pattern that has seam allowance on it. I'm going to sew up a toile, check the fit, and then make myself a pair. I might make a few mods based upon the fabric that I want to use. I might do a patchwork version, I don't know, I'll let you know. If I do it before this video goes live, I will add it. Don't think that's likely because I've got so much to get done. But I would definitely do a video of using this pattern to create something else in a future video. So stay tuned for that. Let me know how you get on in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Do give the video a like if you made it this far because I would appreciate that. And I'll see you in my next video. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.